Today's journey through modern Linux is brought to you by the letter B, and B is for bottom.
Yay! Bottom is my favourite.
Oh, you're familiar with bottom already?
I am, and we've peaked so early in the alphabet.
A favourite indeed, then.
Yes.
Okay, so bottom is not top. It's better than top. So it's another one of these terminal-based system monitoring utilities, of which there seem to be a whole cornucopia these days. It seems to me that these system monitoring tools are the new music player of the mid-2000s, or maybe every application wasn't complete in the mid-1990s until it could read your email sort of, application.
Or Twitter client, or...
Yes.
RSS.
Exactly. Tetris.
So,
yeah.
There are loads of them, and a little while ago, I tried them all. I went through the whole list, and in my assessment, bottom is the best. So it's obviously inspired by the likes of HTOP, but also the other equivalent replacements like GTOP and GoTop and BashTop and BPyTop and the endless list of other tops. So I like this one is bottom. And it's available for everything, everywhere. So if you are running a Linux or Mac OS or Windows, it is available for every platform, on every architecture, in every conceivable package format you can think of. So you are going to have no difficulty finding and installing bottom. We'll have a link to their GitHub, which is a good jumping off place to all of the available places you can get it from.
Yeah, I actually run it on basically everything. I had a field day with some of the other ones that you've mentioned, like BPyTop and stuff like that. And then I don't know how I stumbled on bottom, but it's part of the things I install on a new system. And actually, it's a thing I leave running on basically everything. I leave it running on my home server, and it's running on my desktop and my laptop when they're on, and a Raspberry Pi. And so if I SSH into any machine and I launch Biobu, which is the terminal multiplexer, number 0, the first one, is always bottom.
So what is it about bottom that makes it better than any of the others?
So there's a few things that I really like about it, and I suppose the first is it's beautiful. It's another one of these terminal applications that has real-time graphs that use the Braille font to actually give some sort of, let's say, fidelity to the graphs as they're plotted across the screen. But I think its killer feature is when you compare it to something like HTOP, which can do sorting of the columns, when the widgets for the different sort of metrics that you're interested in are presented, let's take processes, for example, it has the process count, the name, CPU percentage, memory utilization, and a whole bunch of other things. All of those top-level headings are clickable and sortable in the same way that like a data-sorted spreadsheet is. So you can very quickly augment any of these widgets and find what you're looking for based on a number of different properties. And each of those widgets can be exploded into the full screen view. So if you want to drill into one of these things in more detail, you can maximize that widget, for want of a better description, and have a good old poke around inside it and filter it in more detail.
My favorite thing about the mouse support is using the scroll wheel. The CPU utilization by default, for example, shows like the last 60 seconds or something. And if you click that box, it highlights it with a different color box around it. And then if you scroll the mouse wheel, you can zoom out and out and out to like 5 minutes. So it's a much slower moving, longer history, which is quite useful if you've left it running in a terminal somewhere and then you flick to it, you can see whatever the peaks were a couple of minutes ago. And the same goes for network and memory utilization as well. It's quite cool. I've used it actually in bug reports where I was trying to report a bug report in an application where there was a memory leak and I wanted to show the graph of the memory going up and up and up. And then when the killer comes in, it drops, and it's very good for that kind of pictorial representation of usage. It's very good.
Yeah. And although it's a very sort of graphical tool, graphical in a terminal context, unlike other tools that sort of tried to tackle that beautiful visualization, something like Glances that's written in Python and the bash tops and the PyTops of the world, because this is written in Rust, when you run it, if you want to do some debugging, it doesn't then place further burden on the system that you're trying to profile.
It's not the top line on its own table.
Right. And the two last things that I really like about it are it has aliases for, let's call it legacy mode. I think they call it something a bit more flattering in their documentation, but you can effectively invoke bottom in a way that it looks and works like htop.
Nice.
So on my system, I don't have htop or top installed. I just have bottom installed with aliases for top and htop, which invoke bottom in the classic fashion. But you get all of that filtering and sorting, even though it's in the sort of traditional view. And lastly, I mentioned the documentation a couple of times. The documentation is fabulous and exhaustive, and it's one of these tools that looks very simple on the face of it, but you can go very deep with its utility and features, and you can really have some fun exploring your system with it.
Myself and Martin went to the Ubuntu Summit in Latvia recently, and I came away with something interesting.
Uh-oh.
Has Martin got it as well?
It's not contagious, don't worry. I went to a talk by Hector Martin from Asahi Linux and Tobias Hader from Canonical. And the talk was about the Asahi Linux project, which is about bringing Linux to Apple silicon-based Apple devices. So MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros, all the new devices that have these M1 and M2 chips in them. And Hector was presenting remotely via a visual display screen, and Tobias was local in Meet Space, and they did a tag team presentation. Hector talked about the project and a little bit about the boot up process, which I found super fascinating. It's quite technical, but very good. And Tobias talked about Ubuntu Asahi, which I'd kind of heard about, but I didn't realize was so far along. And so Ubuntu Asahi is essentially taking the Asahi Linux enablement work that's been done by Hector and the rest of the Asahi Linux project, and then building an image that's using Ubuntu. So I'm using Ubuntu on my M1 MacBook Air.
So is this a case of you download a different image and slap it on a USB stick and then boot into the installer like you would with any Ubuntu install?
Absolutely not. No. The installer is a curl pipe to bash from
sudo bash by any chance?
Of course, all of this, because there's some interesting monkeying around it has to do in order to organize the boot process such that it doesn't get trampled on by macOS and the Linux side doesn't trample on the macOS side, and they can live together in perfect harmony side by side on the disk.
That was one of the things that surprised me most about this, knowing not a lot about running Asahi Linux on a Apple Silicon device. I had just assumed, like Mark did, that you would install your Linux and goodbye Mac OS. But actually it's a very elegant solution and also very clever once you've seen the presentation on what the actual mechanics of getting this thing to boot Mac OS and Linux are. It preserves your Mac OS install, resizes it, and then provides an amount of space to put the OS on.
Right. So the installer is curl pipe to bash, and it, as Martin says, resizes down your partition. And the interesting thing is I've got a 1 terabyte SSD in my M1 Mac. And that wasn't enough because a whole bunch of disk space was chewed up by Time Machine, the backup software on the macOS side. And I didn't realize when you're not near the hard drive, the external hard drive that's got your Time Machine on, it backs up locally onto the internal SSD and then sends it off to the external disk when you get back home and plug the drive in, which is quite clever. It takes snapshots locally and then sends them off afterwards. The problem was I was at a conference for a few days, and so these backups were queuing up on my local hard drive and taking up space. And so part of the installer said, okay, how much space do you want to give to Linux and how much do you want to keep? And I wanted to split it like 750 gig, 250 gig, with macOS having 750 and Linux having 250, because I wasn't sure how much I would need. But I couldn't do that because of all the Time Machine backups taking a lot of the disk space. But it has good documentation, like Martin said, and I figured out how to get rid of those. That doesn't mean all my backups are gone. It just means the snapshots I had on the local machine were gone, which is fine. And then it did all the resizing, and then there was loads of kind of things that were a little bit scary and in red text and steps that I had to do. But ultimately, by the end of it, it resized down the macOS partition and put Linux on the rest of the disk space. And now I have a dual booting MacBook Air with an M1 ARM CPU. In fact, I'm talking to you from it right now. And
holy cow, are you?
Yes, and recording this in Audacity. So if you can't hear this, then that did not work.
I was going to say, I'd heard that there was still some missing bits around the sound stack.
Yes, there are some missing bits. So the things that are notably missing is, yes, audio, partly because there is some complication with the way the speakers are driven, and they've intentionally disabled it until they get some software DSP control in order to ensure they don't blow the speakers out. So that's fine. Well, the good news is I have a mixer and a microphone and a pair of headphones, and so I'm actually using an external audio device.
Okay. So audio works, it's just the speakers in the MacBook itself that won't work.
The internal audio, yes.
Right.
Exactly. And also Bluetooth headphones work. So while we were there, Martin pulled out a pair of Bluetooth headphones, which have a little USB-C dongle, and he just plugged it in, and we opened up YouTube and it just played fine. And the audio played over Bluetooth. So that's not actually a catastrophe, not having audio, because a lot of people have headphones. So that's fine. And I'm now recording a podcast with it. So that's fine. The webcam works, clearly, because you just saw me on my internal webcam, which was trash because it's an Apple webcam. And so I've plugged in an external webcam via USB, and that works as well. So that's fine.
Yeah, and that whole story about the speaker enablement was fascinating because Hector made it clear throughout the presentation that as they're doing the enablement of the different capabilities of the Apple Silicon and its features of the SoC, they are striving to have as good enablement as you'd find in macOS or better. So they're not sort of half-assing it. They are really being very thorough. And with regards to the speaker support, he actually gave some insight into what they're doing. And I think they've implemented 2 software DSPs for 2 different parts of the audio implementation for the speakers to ensure that the speaker quality is as good on Asahi Linux as it is on macOS. And they've even had to do some upstream pipe wire work to sort of hide the physical device so that only these dummy DSP devices are exposed as the actual audio property.
I found all that super interesting during the talk, and it was the fact that they were taking good care of this stuff, and they sounded like they knew what they were doing, and other people have blazed a trail and tried this. So I thought, well, I'm at a conference, there's loads of nerds nearby, and someone else, actually, Tim on the engineering side at Canonical, came up to us afterwards and said, oh, do you want to see it running, before I'd actually got the install done? And he pulled out an M2 MacBook Pro with some top end M2 chip in it. And oh my gosh, it flies, absolutely flies on that thing. He was like throwing windows all over the place, and just the speed at which it boots was fast. And I felt confident that if someone else nearby who's bright and, clever and smart can run it, then so can I. And so I've catalogued some of the things that do and don't work. And I've mentioned audio, that works fine. But the thing that's killer with this, the 2 things for me that's killer with this, power management. This thing sips battery power on macOS, and it's the same on Linux. It runs for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's not like a horrible, ThinkPad with 2 hours battery life. This thing runs all day. It's great. And the trackpad is really good. I've had trackpads on Mac laptops in the past under Linux that have been horrific, and I've plugged in external mice because it's been horrible. This is great. The scrolling is just nice, and the clicking is nice. It just seems to be good. Well done. I applaud that. There are some applications that are missing, most notably proprietary ones. So, for example, we ship with Firefox in the image, but I most notably use Microsoft Edge, but that's not available for ARM64, so I can't use that. So as I'm not a massive Firefox fan, I've switched to using Chromium because there is an ARM64 build of Chromium in the Snap Store, so I'll use that. Interestingly though, some of the other proprietary applications that I use on Linux a lot, Sublime Text and Sublime Merge, they're available. I can get those from the upstream provider and I use those all day, every day. Other things that I use on a regular basis, SyncThing, Zero Tier, Hugo, they're all available as well, on top of all the other desktop-y stuff that I tend to use. Things that aren't available include Spotify, Discord, and Slack, but all three of those can be operated in a tab in a web browser, so that's fine. I can still use all of those. And in fact, there's a graphical Spotify client called Spot that's a GTK application that I published in the Snap Store and have never tested on ARM64. Well, it works on ARM64, so that's great as well. The only application I found that's actually broken at the moment is, interestingly, Telegram. And this was something that got raised in the presentation. There's something different between the kernel page sizes in a normal Linux install where it's 4K page sizes, and in Asahi they've gone with 16K page sizes for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. And there's a problem that programs that are built for a 4K kernel page size don't run very well or at all on 16K kernel page size, which is what Asahi does. And so if you install the pre-built binary of Telegram and try and run it, it just crashes. However, if you clone the repository, you can build it yourself and the binary works. So I am actually using the GUI version of Telegram. I actually cloned the repository and ran Snapcraft to build it locally. And that was a great fun exercise because the upstream Telegram client builds a whole load of Qt as well as everything else because it's a Qt application. And so that took a while and really exercised the CPU, like I could see all the CPU cores pegged at the top in my little bottom window that was scrolling by. It was great. So I am thoroughly enjoying this experience, and I'm spending more time booted into Ubuntu Asahi on this thing than I am on macOS, and I love it. And I would encourage other people to try it out if you're feeling adventurous, but it's not too scary. It works. I mean, the fact that you can hear me and see me, and I'm using all the standard stuff I use every day. So, like, what's not to love?
On the last show, I spoke about making a static blog, something that you could follow and interact with via Mastodon and other ActivityPub based applications. And I've gone a bit further now and implemented an ActivityPub inbox for my proof of concept blog. This isn't on my real blog yet. I'm going to get it right in a proof of concept and then work out how I actually integrate it with my real blog. Now, the inbox in an ActivityPub application can't be static. It has to actually accept a request and run some code on the request it sends, because this is what lets you do things like following and favoriting and replying to messages. So there does actually have to be some processing going on with this. And I got thinking, well, I've got my proof of concept, which is just some HTML files and some JSON files in a directory just on a static web server. And how can I add some dynamic stuff to this without making it too complicated? But I realized that there's something quite clever about the way that ActivityPub is implemented, which is that an ActivityPub actor, which is like the file that represents a user in ActivityPub, is basically a list of URLs for your inbox, your outbox, your profile image, and your public key and things like that. And they don't have to be in the same place. So while I've got my blog on this server with the outbox file there, which is with a list of all of its posts in, the inbox can be somewhere completely different. I just need to point to it in that actor file. So what I've done is I've used AWS Lambda, which is a service for what they call serverless functions, which is basically you write some code and you can invoke that code without having to worry about what it's running on, and expose that on a URL. And that URL is my inbox. So if you send me a follow via Mastodon, it invokes this Lambda function, which runs and does some stuff, which I'll come to in a minute. And that allows me to do the interactive bits that I need without having to worry about where my actual blog is hosted, having support for this sort of thing.
So does that mean on your website that's hosting your blog, you can have just a static generated HTML and you don't have to have active stuff like PHP and Python exposed to the world? But the code that manages the following and all of their active stuff is running in a remote AWS thing and then disappears after it's finished running.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So at the moment, I've only implemented following and unfollowing. Basically, what that does is it takes in a request, which is essentially a JSON document, which says, here's who I am, and I'd like to follow you, please. And it looks at that and checks if they're already following you. If they're not, it adds them to your list of followers, and then it responds to them and says, okay, I've accepted your follow. Couple of tricky bits that I came across. Firstly, to make sure that this isn't just abused terrifically, requests have to be signed and verified using key pairs. Fortunately, I was able to crib heavily from a Node.js module for handling ActivityPub signatures, which, having read the code, I'm quite glad I didn't have to work out for myself. But basically, he's provided functions to verify a signature and sign a document, or sign a message, that you're then going to send.
And where does that run? Does that also run inside the Lambda?
Exactly. So the Lambda is written in JavaScript. It runs on Node.js inside AWS's service, and I've just included his library in my code. So when you receive a message, you verify the signature to say, yes, this is actually from the person who says they're trying to follow you. So you don't get people sending you a message saying, this guy wants to follow you, start sending him notifications. But the tricky bit then was you have to send a message back. Now, what I'm used to in my normal web development is that you get a request and then you respond to that request by, you do some processing and then you send a response at the end. But actually what you're doing here is you're getting a request saying, I'd like to request to follow you. But then the process of saying, yes, I accept your request is technically asynchronous. It doesn't have to happen in response to the same request. What you're actually doing is you're then sending a message to the follower's inbox to say, yes, I accept that. So you need a way to create a message, sign it, and then send that to them. And the tricky thing there is that you've got to have your private key accessible in this function. And if you ever looked at a private key file, you'll know it's a big sort of chunk of ASCII with a load of line breaks in. And the way that AWS stores things like that is in a service called Secrets Manager, which stores stuff as JSON, and JSON doesn't like line breaks in its strings at all. So most of what I've been doing to get this all working has been trying to work out exactly how to format stuff and store stuff and process stuff so that when you say, here's my key to sign this message, it can actually format it right and process it and say, yes, I actually recognize this as a private key.
Nice.
But the long story short of it is it works, and you can click follow in Mastodon. It's added to my list of followers. It says in Mastodon that you're following it.
Nice.
You've talked about using sort of Lambda functions and serverless. What cost is that for you? I know you're only testing at the moment, but what cost do you anticipate that's going to be? And have you had any difficulties getting your deployed code down to a small enough bundle to fit in the constraints of the serverless platform?
I'm hoping that the cost is going to be zero because AWS provides a free tier which provides quite a lot of invocations and runtime in the scale that I'm talking of running a personal blog.
Mm-hmm.
They're not in the business of nickel and diming you for every millisecond that you're running. They're in the business of charging you for running large scale applications. So I'm hoping that this won't have, if it has any cost, I don't think it'll be a significant cost to me for something like this. If you were running something a lot bigger, it might do. But in terms of keeping everything small, I've not had a problem with that yet. I don't think the code that I'm writing isn't very big. If there is a problem that I hit with that, it's going to be the libraries that I'm including. But I have some experience with this in the past, and the libraries that I have to include to interact with AWS are actually broken up based on the services that you use. So it's quite easy to keep those small.
Okay.
Also, for the cost to you, given that this is only for the follows and I guess for you to send notifications that blog posts are out, that's not a tremendous number of transactions. Like if your blog appeared on the front page of Hacker News and you got lots and lots of hits, that's all hitting your blog. That's not thousands of people following you as a result. I mean, they might, but unfortunately they probably won't. The traffic is all going to your static blog, not to the Lambda functions, right?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, the part about sending the notifications when you publish a new post, I haven't quite worked this out yet, but that might not even happen here. That might be part of the build process for the blog. When I create a new post, I run that and it needs to then go and get the list of my followers, but then that's when the messages get sent, not
got it.
Happening there.
I'm finding all of this experimentation with your Fediverse syndication and interaction fascinating. When I was at the Ubuntu Summit, there was a talk from the developer of Owncast, and Owncast is self-hosted Twitch, which sounds like that must be a scary prospect, but actually it's a single Go binary. And one of the features I was really compelled by is all of the identity management and chat interaction is all brokered through the Fediverse. So once you have your Owncast instance running, all of your go live notifications and follows and what have you and chat identities all go out through the Fediverse in much the same way you're describing that you want your blog to have this sort of, Fediverse presence. And I was really quite impressed with how slick all of that integration was.
Does that go down to the level of like real-time chat during a stream as well?
It does.
That's really interesting. I wasn't sure how capable it was of doing something with that sort of frequency. But I guess that kind of depends on how the server itself implements it rather than the protocol.
I was quite interested in that actually, as it relates to what you were just talking about, follow request and an accept request back the other way. Because when I started watching someone on Owncast a week or two ago, I wanted to sign in and say hello. And when I clicked sign in, it bounced me through Mastodon and sent a code to me to authenticate as a private message on Mastodon. And I thought, wow, the integration is just wonderful, because it was super easy because I already had Mastodon open because that's how I discovered them. And so it was just it felt well knitted together. And I like the idea of having services that are like nicely knitted together, even if they're completely unrelated to the Fediverse, that kind of thing.
Exactly. That's the thing that I really like about this is this sort of loose coupling that you get. The fact that I realized, your application can actually be made up of a bunch of different services in different places and it all just works together. So the next bits for me are, I'm interested to see if I can have a button on my blog's page where you can click it and then you follow from your instance of Mastodon. I'm not quite sure how that would work, because at the moment you have to be in your instance of Mastodon and find the blog and click follow there, which makes a lot more sense. The other thing is that while you can find the blog and follow it, it doesn't actually show up properly yet. So I've got a list of followers and I can see the followers at my end. But if you look at the followers in Mastodon, it doesn't display followers from other servers, even though I know, because Alan, I got you to follow it, that there is someone else following from the same server. And also the posts aren't showing up yet. So my next challenge is working out why that is and getting it working.
Looking forward to hearing about it.
Yep, totally.